Okay, g'day everyone. Today we have on BS Radar, hashtag BS Radar. I've got Joel Lalgee based out of Milwaukee. Are you a Bucks fan? I haven't even asked that yet.
You know what? I'm actually more of a football fan, so a soccer fan. So I'm a Liverpool fan, but it's hard not to be a Bucks fan with the way they're playing right now.
Especially right now, geez. Yeah, with Giannis.
Been too long.
So Joel has got a massive following on LinkedIn. If you're not following him already, you should definitely jump on, post great content, really inspirational. He works in recruitment, construction, headhunting. Jump on, great experience. Within that background, obviously he would have had to sort through a lot of BS with candidates. So I was really keen to get him to jump on today and share his one hot tip to sniff out the BS with a candidate. What do you got for me, Joel?
Yeah, so I think one of the big topics of conversation when you're in recruiting is salary. And I think a lot of times when you're hiring someone new, number one, nobody likes to talk about salary. Nobody wants to come out and have that conversation. So it's already uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But what you find, when you bring up salary, you're going to find a lot of people that obviously want to make as much money as possible.
Yep.
And so you find yourself in an unusual situation. You have a client that's really trying to get somebody for as little as possible and a candidate that's trying to make as much as possible.
Yeah.
So I think that's sniffing out BS on both sides, but I'm gonna approach it from the client side. Like if you're interviewing somebody, how do you really dig in deep and find out if they're embellishing or maybe they're not telling you how much they're really making? And the strategy that I like to use is I like to bring up salary pretty early on in the conversation. So I like to approach it and kind of throw the tester out. So ask them what range they'd be looking for in the next role.
Yep.
As I continue the conversation, I just keep on revisiting that point. And obviously if there's a change from when we initially started, that's a really great way to sniff it out. And then I think just getting more specific. So really breaking the salary down and saying, okay, well, how much of a base would you target? What about bonuses? What about incentives? What about commission? And what I find is the more specific you become, it's like with anything, the harder it is to lie and kind of overcompensate. I also like to throw out there as well, and candidates might not like to hear this, but I do throw out there and say, if you come into an organization and you're making the most out of anybody, if there is a downturn, if there's a change in the economy, you're usually going to be the first person out. And also, if you come into an organization and you're making the most money, there's a lot more of a expectation. There's a lot more pressure on you to actually produce. So,
right away.
So throwing out some of those warnings I find helpful. I've heard people throwing out there that they will ask for last year's tax returns. I don't think you need to get that extreme with it. But even just hinting at that, a lot of times can have people come around. And I've even had been situations where I've had people write their own offer letters. So particularly for sales roles, that works really well. Anything with commission, breaking down like, well, how exactly do you want to get paid, and how does that tie into your performance? And that brings a little bit more accountability.
Cool.
So that's usually the techniques that I'm using.
Excellent. There's two things there I thought were really key. I think if you're bringing that salary piece up really early in the conversation, because that candidate might come in with a number in their head, and then usually the salary question is all the way at the end, and maybe the interview went a whole lot better than they thought it would, and the number they started with, by the time they get to the end, they could be quite a bit higher. So always good to get that honest response early. And then about breaking it down into specifics, it is a lot harder to lie when you're like, okay, how much comms, how much bonuses, etc. Like that's I guess they're kind of building themselves a house of cards if they were to try to lie to all of those.
Exactly. And I think it's, as a recruiter and as anybody working at a company, it's always important that you paint the picture outside of money as well. And I'd say in general, if you're dealing with a candidate and the focus is just money, a lot of times, unless it's sales, which obviously you want somebody who's really driven by money, you need to really drift the conversation to company culture, the mission, the purpose, and focus on that. And I think when you break it down, even if you look at $10,000 difference in salary, for example,
Yeah.
You take away taxes and you break it down to actually how much that equates to each week. It's probably in that $20 to $30 range, depending on what those taxes are.
Yeah.
And I think it's important is, you know, when you're selling your role or when you're selling your company, to understand and paint that picture and say, yeah, are you willing to pay? Is it really worth $21 a week when you compare it with what our culture is and what we're doing?
Yeah.
And if you can paint that picture, again, that really helps. It helps people realize that there's more than money when it comes to a new position.
Totally.
And really helps solidify that conversation.
Totally. Awesome, Joel. Thanks so much. That was, unreal. If anyone's got any questions around Joel's BS radar tips, just feel free to pop them down below. Please follow him. Thanks again, Joel. That was awesome.
Appreciate it, Russ. Good to see you, man.
Cheers.